Marcus Thompson had always been the kind of person who thought rules didn't really apply to him. At 32 years old, this successful software developer from California had money, confidence, and a habit of pushing boundaries wherever he traveled. His Instagram was filled with photos of him doing things tourists weren't supposed to do, climbing restricted monuments, sneaking into off-limits areas, and always with that smug smile that said he'd gotten away with something. London was supposed to be just another conquest on his European adventure. He'd already caused minor incidents in Paris when he'd tried to touch the Mona Lisa for a selfie, and in Rome when he'd attempted to carve his initials into the Colosseum wall. But London felt different. Maybe it was the gray October sky, or maybe it was the way everyone seemed so proper and serious. But Marcus felt an unusual urge to do something truly outrageous. The idea struck him as he stood outside Buckingham Palace on a crisp Tuesday morning. The famous red-coated guards stood motionless at their posts, their tall black hats making them look like toy soldiers. Tourists snapped photos from a respectful distance, children pointed in wonder, and everyone followed the clear barriers that kept visitors at bay. Marcus watched this orderly scene with growing irritation. "They're just actors," he muttered to himself, adjusting his expensive camera, probably getting paid minimum wage to stand there and look serious. He'd done his research, of course. Marcus always did his homework before pulling his stunts. He knew the guards were real soldiers, highly trained members of the British Army's elite regiments. He knew they took their duty seriously and were authorized to use force if necessary. But knowing something and truly believing it were two different things, and Marcus had never encountered a situation his charm and American passport couldn't handle. The morning crowd was particularly thick, with tour groups clustering around the palace gates. Marcus noticed how the guards never moved, never acknowledged the hundreds of photos being taken, never even blinked when children made faces at them. Their discipline was remarkable, but to Marcus it looked like weakness. He pulled out his phone and started recording a video for his social media followers. "What's up, everyone? Marcus here, live from Buckingham Palace in London. You know what I'm thinking? These guards are supposed to be so tough, so professional. But I bet they're just regular guys playing dress-up. I mean, come on, those fuzzy hats? Those red coats? They look like Christmas decorations." He continued filming as he walked closer to the barriers, his voice getting louder and more animated. Several other tourists looked at him with disapproval, but Marcus thrived on attention, even negative attention. A few British tourists moved away from him, sensing trouble brewing. "You know what, guys? I think these guards need to lighten up a little. They're so serious all the time. Where's their sense of humor? I bet I could make one of them crack a smile." Marcus grinned at his phone camera, already imagining the viral potential of what he was planning. That's when he remembered the hot sauce. Earlier that morning, he'd bought a bottle of extremely spicy ghost pepper sauce from a novelty shop in Covent Garden. The shopkeeper had warned him it was one of the hottest sauces in the world, rating over 1 million on the Scoville scale. Marcus had bought it as a gag gift for his brother back home, but now he saw a different opportunity. "This is going to be epic," he whispered to his phone, fishing the small bottle out of his jacket pocket. The bright red label screamed warnings in multiple languages, but Marcus only saw potential internet fame. The guard he'd chosen was young, maybe early 20s, with a serious expression and perfect posture. Private James Morrison had been on duty for 2 hours already, and he was acutely aware of the growing crowd and the increasing number of tourists trying to get his attention. He'd been trained to ignore distractions, to maintain his position no matter what. But he hadn't been trained for what was about to happen. Marcus approached the barrier, his phone still recording. "Okay, everyone, watch this. I'm going to give this guard a little taste of American hospitality. Maybe some spice will wake him up." He laughed at his own joke, completely oblivious to the concerned looks from nearby tourists. The plan was simple in Marcus's mind. Splash a little hot sauce on the guard, film his reaction, and create the kind of viral video that would make him internet famous. He'd done similar things before, harmless pranks that got people talking. Sure, he'd been arrested a few times, but his lawyer always sorted things out, and the attention was always worth it. What Marcus didn't understand was the difference between pranking random strangers and assaulting a member of the Queen's Guard at one of the most heavily monitored locations in Britain. He didn't consider that these weren't actors or street performers, but highly trained soldiers responsible for protecting one of the most important buildings in the country. He didn't think about the dozens of security cameras recording his every move, or the plainclothes police officers positioned throughout the crowd. As he uncapped the bottle of ghost pepper sauce, Marcus felt the familiar rush of adrenaline he always got before pulling a stunt. This was going to be his masterpiece, the video that would finally make him truly famous. He could already see the headlines. American tourist pranks royal guard. Viral video shocks London. Palace guard gets spicy surprise. The irony was that Marcus had never been wrong about anything in his privileged life. His confidence came from a track record of success, of always landing on his feet, of never facing real consequences for his actions. But standing there in the shadow of Buckingham Palace, bottle of hot sauce in hand, he was about to learn that some lines should never be crossed, and some institutions don't have a sense of humor. The countdown to his biggest mistake had begun, though Marcus Thompson had no idea that in exactly 11 minutes, he would be desperately wishing he'd never heard of ghost pepper sauce, viral videos, or Buckingham Palace. The moment Marcus stepped over the barrier, everything changed. The casual chatter of tourists seemed to fade, and an invisible tension filled the air. Private James Morrison, the young guard Marcus had chosen as his target, remained perfectly still, but his training had already kicked in. From the corner of his eye, he tracked the approaching American tourist, noting the phone in one hand and the small bottle in the other. Marcus felt invincible as he crossed into restricted territory. His phone was still recording, capturing every step of what he believed would be his greatest prank yet. "Here we go, guys," he whispered to his followers. "Time to wake up, Sleeping Beauty." The ghost pepper sauce felt warm in his hand, and he could smell its intense, almost chemical heat even through the sealed bottle. "Sir, you need to step back immediately," came a firm voice from somewhere behind Marcus. He ignored it, too focused on his target to pay attention to the security personnel who were already mobilizing. In his mind, he had maybe 30 seconds to pull off his stunt before anyone could stop him. What he didn't realize was that he was already surrounded by more security than he could imagine. Private Morrison's training had prepared him for many scenarios, but having hot sauce thrown at him by an American tourist wasn't one of them. Still, his discipline held firm. He couldn't move from his post, couldn't acknowledge the threat, couldn't even turn his head to track Marcus's approach. All he could do was trust in the security systems around him and maintain his position, no matter what was about to happen. Marcus raised the bottle, his thumb already on the squeeze mechanism. "This is for being so boring," he shouted and squeezed hard. The bright red sauce shot out in a thick stream, splattering across Private Morrison's pristine red tunic and hitting him directly in the face. The caustic liquid immediately began burning the young soldier's eyes and skin, but his training held. He didn't move, didn't cry out, didn't break his stance even as tears began streaming down his face from the chemical burn. "Got him," Marcus laughed, still filming. "Did you see that? Direct hit. Come on, soldier boy, show us some emotion." He was so caught up in his perceived victory that he didn't notice the rapid response happening around him. Within seconds, plainclothes officers emerged from the crowd like ghosts materializing from thin air. Armed police appeared from positions Marcus hadn't even known existed. The elaborate security network that protected Buckingham Palace had been watching his every move from the moment he'd approached the barrier, and now it sprang into action with military precision. Armed police. "Get on the ground now." The command came from 3 different directions simultaneously. Marcus spun around, his phone still recording, his face shifting from triumph to confusion. Where had all these officers come from? The tourists who had been standing casually nearby were suddenly revealed to be undercover security personnel, their weapons drawn and trained on him. Whoa, wait. Marcus held up his hands, but he was still holding the bottle of hot sauce in his phone. "It's just a prank. It's just hot sauce, look." He waved the bottle, which only caused more officers to shout commands at him. The takedown was swift and professional. Marcus found himself face down on the cold pavement before he fully understood what was happening. His expensive phone skittered across the ground, its screen cracking against the stone. The bottle of ghost pepper sauce rolled away, leaving a trail of red liquid that looked disturbingly like blood. "I'm American. I'm American!" Marcus shouted, as if his nationality would somehow protect him. Plastic zip tie restraints bit into his wrists as he was secured. "This is just a misunderstanding. It was a joke. A prank." But nobody was laughing. The tourists who remained were being quickly moved back by uniformed officers, creating a wide perimeter around the scene. Emergency medical personnel were already attending to Private Morrison, who was finally allowed to break his position. The young soldier was clearly in pain, his face red and swollen from the chemical burn, but he remained composed even as medics flushed his eyes with water. Marcus began to understand that this wasn't going according to plan. The viral video he'd envisioned was indeed being created, but he wasn't the hero of the story. Security cameras had captured everything from multiple angles, and dozens of tourists had their own recordings of his assault and arrest. But instead of making him look clever or funny, the footage showed exactly what it was: an unprovoked attack on a serving soldier. "You don't understand," Marcus kept repeating as he was hauled to his feet. "It's just hot sauce. It's not dangerous. It's just a prank." But as he said the words, he could see Private Morrison's face red and blistered where the caustic sauce had made contact. The harmless ghost pepper sauce, with its million-plus Scoville rating, was causing genuine chemical burns. Detective Inspector Sarah Collins arrived on scene within minutes, her experienced eyes taking in the situation immediately. She'd seen plenty of tourist incidents over her 20 years with the Metropolitan Police, but this one struck her as particularly reckless. The American was clearly wealthy, clearly entitled, and clearly had no understanding of what he'd just done. Marcus Thompson, she read from his California driver's license, retrieved from his wallet. Software developer from San Francisco, age 32. She looked at him with the kind of expression reserved for people who should know better. "Do you understand what you've just done, Mr. Thompson?" "I threw some hot sauce at a guard," Marcus said, his voice smaller now but still defiant. "It's not like I hurt anyone. It's just a prank." "You assaulted a serving member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces," Detective Inspector Collins replied coldly. "You caused chemical burns to his face and eyes. You breached security at a royal residence. You created a public disturbance and endangered other members of the public." She paused, letting the weight of the charges sink in. "Mr. Thompson, this isn't California and this isn't a game." As Marcus was loaded into the police van, he caught sight of Private Morrison being helped toward an ambulance. The young soldier's eyes were swollen nearly shut, his face was bright red, and he was clearly in significant pain. For the first time, Marcus felt a flicker of something that might have been regret, but it was quickly overwhelmed by anger at being arrested. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to the officer beside him. "It's just hot sauce. People eat this stuff for fun." But even as he said it, Marcus was beginning to realize that his 11 minutes of fame had turned into something very different than what he'd planned. The viral video was indeed being created, but he was about to become famous for all the wrong reasons. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice was starting to whisper that maybe, just maybe, he'd finally gone too far. The ride to the police station passed in uncomfortable silence. Marcus sat in the back of the police van, his hands still zip-tied behind him, watching familiar London landmarks pass by through the small window. What had started as a perfect morning for content creation had turned into his worst nightmare in a matter of minutes. The reality of his situation was beginning to sink in, though his pride still wouldn't let him fully accept the seriousness of what he'd done. Paddington Green Police Station was nothing like the casual, almost friendly police stations Marcus had encountered during his previous minor run-ins with law enforcement in other countries. This was a fortress-like building designed for serious crimes, and as Marcus was processed through its systems, he began to understand that he wasn't being treated like a simple tourist who'd made a mistake. "Full name?" asked the custody sergeant, a stern woman with graying hair and tired eyes who had clearly seen everything during her career. "Marcus James Thompson," he replied, trying to inject some of his usual confidence into his voice. "Look, I think there's been a huge misunderstanding here. I'm an American citizen and I have rights. I want to call the American embassy immediately." The sergeant didn't even look up from her paperwork. "You'll get your phone call when we're ready, Mr. Thompson. Right now. We need to process you properly." She continued with her questions: address, occupation, next of kin, medical conditions, medications. Each answer was recorded with methodical precision, creating an official record that would follow Marcus for the rest of his life. The cell they placed him in was small, clean, and utterly without comfort. A narrow bench, a toilet, and 4 concrete walls painted in institutional green. Marcus had never been in a real jail cell before. His previous arrests had involved brief detentions in holding rooms, followed by quick releases once his lawyer arrived. This felt different, more permanent, more serious. Hours passed before Detective Inspector Collins came to see him. Marcus had spent the time alternating between anger, boredom, and growing concern about his situation. His phone had been confiscated, so he had no way to contact his lawyer, his family, or his social media followers who were probably wondering why his live stream had ended so abruptly. "Mr. Thompson," Detective Inspector Collins said as she entered the interview room, a thick file folder in her hands. "I hope you've had time to think about what happened today." "I've had plenty of time to think about how you people have completely overreacted to a harmless prank," Marcus replied, some of his earlier bravado returning. "In America, we have something called freedom of expression. What I did was protected speech." Collins opened her file and pulled out several photographs. She placed them on the table in front of Marcus, and his confidence evaporated instantly. The images showed Private Morrison's face in horrific detail. His eyes swollen shut, his skin blistered and raw where the ghost pepper sauce had made contact, his lips cracked and bleeding. "This is what your harmless prank did to Private James Morrison," Collins said quietly. "Third-degree chemical burns, possible permanent scarring. He's been hospitalized and may lose vision in his left eye." She paused, watching Marcus's face carefully. "He's 21 years old, Mr. Thompson. He joined the army to serve his country, and you've possibly ended his military career for a viral video." Marcus stared at the photographs, his mouth dry. The young man in the pictures didn't look anything like the stoic guard he'd targeted. This was a real person, badly injured, lying in a hospital bed. I didn't know it would," he started, then stopped. "The bottle said it was hot sauce. People eat this stuff. People eat small amounts mixed with food, not concentrated streams shot directly into their eyes," Collins replied. "Ghost pepper sauce contains capsaicin at levels that constitute a chemical weapon when used as you used it. In fact, pepper spray used by police forces often contains lower concentrations of capsaicin than what you threw at Private Morrison." The detective pulled out another set of documents. "Let me explain your current situation. Mr. Thompson, you're being charged with assault occasioning actual bodily harm under Section 47 of the Offenses Against the Person Act. Maximum sentence, 5 years in prison. You're also being charged with breach of security at a protected site under the Serious Organized Crime and Police Act. Maximum sentence, 1 year and unlimited fines." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. 5 years? That's impossible. It was just a prank. I'm a tourist. I made a mistake. You're also being investigated for possible terrorism offenses, Collins continued, her voice remaining calm and professional. The Terrorism Act 2000 defines terrorism as actions designed to influence the government or intimidate the public for political, religious, or ideological causes. Your social media posts leading up to this incident show a clear pattern of anti-British sentiment and a stated intention to wake up and humiliate symbols of British authority. "I'm not a terrorist," Marcus shouted, panic finally breaking through his facade. "I'm a software developer. I write code for mobile apps." "This is insane." Collins pulled out a tablet and showed Marcus his own social media posts from the past week. His tweets mocking British culture, his Instagram stories making fun of the royal family, his Facebook posts calling the guards toy soldiers and overpaid actors. When taken together, they painted a picture of someone with a deliberate agenda against British institutions. Your own words, Mr. Thompson. Your own videos. "You came to our country with the specific intention of humiliating our military personnel and our national symbols. You planned this attack, recorded it, and broadcast it to your followers. That's not a prank. That's premeditated assault with ideological motivation." Marcus realized that his carefully crafted online persona, designed to make him look edgy and rebellious, was now being used as evidence against him. Every joke, every sarcastic comment, every dismissive post about British culture was being reframed as evidence of his criminal intent. "I want a lawyer," he said quietly. "I want to call the American embassy. I have rights." "You do have rights," Collins agreed, "and we'll honor them completely. But Mr. Thompson, this isn't going away. Private Morrison's injuries are severe and well documented. Your assault was recorded by dozens of security cameras and tourist phones. Your own video provides clear evidence of premeditation. No lawyer, no matter how expensive, can change those facts." As Collins gathered her materials to leave, Marcus felt smaller than he ever had in his life. The viral fame he'd sought was indeed coming his way. But as the villain of the story, not the hero, social media was already picking up the incident, and the hashtag #Buckingham Palace assault was beginning to trend. "One more thing, Mr. Thompson," Collins said as she reached the door. "Private Morrison? He's requested to meet with you once he's released from the hospital. He wants to understand why you targeted him, why you thought hurting a stranger would make good entertainment." She paused. "Perhaps you should think about what you'd like to say to him." Left alone in the interview room, Marcus finally began to grasp the full scope of what he'd done. This wasn't about viral videos or social media fame anymore. This was about a young soldier lying in a hospital bed with chemical burns because Marcus had thought it would be funny. For the first time in his privileged life, Marcus Thompson was going to face real consequences for his actions, and no amount of money or charm was going to save him. Marcus had no idea that while he sat in his cell, his story was exploding across the internet in ways he never could have imagined. The viral fame he desperately sought was finally his, but it came in the form of universal condemnation rather than admiration. Within hours of his arrest, Buckingham Palace assault was trending worldwide, and Marcus Thompson had become one of the most hated men on the internet. The footage was devastating. Multiple angles showed Marcus crossing the barrier, ignoring police commands and deliberately attacking Private Morrison with the chemical sauce. But it was the aftermath that truly damned him. Images of the young soldier's burned face contrasted sharply with Marcus's smug expression as he was arrested. Social media users around the world shared the videos with comments ranging from disgust to calls for justice. Entitled, "American Tourist Attacks, British Soldier," screamed the headline in The Sun. The Daily Mail ran a photo comparison showing Marcus's luxury lifestyle alongside images of Private Morrison's injuries. Even international news networks picked up the story, with CNN running a segment titled "When Pranks Become Crimes, the Buckingham Palace Assault." Marcus's expensive lawyer, Jonathan Hartwell QC, arrived at the police station 18 hours after the arrest. Hartwell was known for representing wealthy Americans who found themselves in trouble abroad, and his usual approach was to minimize charges through diplomatic channels and generous settlements. But when he reviewed the evidence against his new client, even his experienced confidence wavered. "Marcus," Hartwell said during their first meeting, "I need you to understand the seriousness of your situation. This isn't like your previous incidents in other countries. The evidence against you is overwhelming. The victim's injuries are severe, and the public sentiment is entirely against you." Marcus, who had barely slept and looked haggard after his night in custody, leaned forward eagerly. "But you can get me out of this, right? Make a deal? Pay some compensation? That's how it usually works." Hartwell shook his head grimly. "The Crown Prosecution Service has made it clear they intend to pursue the maximum charges. Assault occasioning actual bodily harm, breach of security at a protected site, and they're still considering terrorism-related charges. Marcus, you could be looking at 6 years in prison." 6 years. Marcus's voice cracked. "For throwing hot sauce at someone? That's impossible. That's insane." "You didn't throw hot sauce at someone," Hartwell corrected. "You committed a premeditated chemical assault on a serving soldier at Britain's most protected royal residence while filming it for social media. The prosecution will argue that you came to this country specifically to attack British institutions and humiliate British personnel." Hartwell pulled out his tablet and showed Marcus the media coverage. Marcus watched in horror as news anchors discussed his case with security experts who labeled him a domestic terrorist. Social media analysis showed his previous posts being dissected for anti-British sentiment. Even his own countrymen were turning against him, with American veterans groups issuing statements condemning his attack on a fellow serviceman. "We need to discuss a plea bargain," Hartwell said. "If you plead guilty to assault occasioning actual bodily harm and agree to a significant compensation package for Private Morrison, we might get the other charges dropped and negotiate for a reduced sentence." "How reduced?" Marcus asked weakly. 2 to 3 years, possibly with early release for good behavior and community service upon your return to the United States." Marcus felt his world collapsing. 3 years in a British prison. His software company would fire him. His social media career would be over. His reputation would be destroyed forever. What if I don't take the plea? Then you go to trial, and given the evidence and public sentiment, you'll likely receive the maximum sentence. Marcus, I've seen the footage. I've seen Private Morrison's injuries. I've read your social media posts. A jury will convict you and a judge will throw the book at you. The conversation was interrupted by Detective Inspector Collins, who brought news that made Marcus's situation even worse. Private Morrison's condition had deteriorated overnight. The chemical burns had caused severe corneal damage, and doctors were now saying he would likely lose sight in his left eye permanently. The charges are being upgraded, Collins informed them. Grievous bodily harm with intent, which carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. The prosecution believes your choice of ghost pepper sauce with its extreme capsaicin content shows deliberate intent to cause maximum harm. Marcus stared at her in shock. Life imprisonment? For a prank? This is insane. I never intended to blind anyone. I didn't even know it would hurt him that badly. Your internet search history suggests otherwise, Collins replied calmly. Our digital forensics team has found that you researched the effects of capsaicin exposure the night before your attack. You also watched several videos showing the effects of pepper spray on human subjects. The prosecution will argue that you knew exactly what you were doing. Marcus remembered those late-night internet searches, but they had been motivated by curiosity and showmanship, not malice. He'd wanted to understand how hot the sauce was so he could play up the drama for his video. He'd never connected those searches to actual harm. But now, in the harsh light of the interview room, his casual research looked like criminal preparation. The media attention continued to intensify. Marcus's hometown newspaper in San Francisco ran a story interviewing his former colleagues and neighbors. The picture they painted was of an entitled, attention-seeking individual who had always pushed boundaries without considering consequences. His ex-girlfriend gave an interview describing his pattern of increasingly reckless behavior in pursuit of social media fame. Private Morrison's regiment issued a statement supporting their injured colleague and condemning the attack. The statement noted that Morrison had been serving with distinction and had been looking forward to completing his deployment at Buckingham Palace before the assault ended his military career. A crowdfunding campaign for Morrison's medical expenses raised over $100,000 in its first day. While Marcus became the target of death threats and boycotts, Marcus's parents flew in from California, their faces gray with shame and worry. His mother wept when she saw the footage of the attack, unable to understand how her son had become capable of such cruelty. His father, a respected businessman in Silicon Valley, found his own reputation tarnished by association with his son's actions. "How did we raise someone who could do this?" his mother asked during a painful family meeting in the prison consultation room. "That poor boy in the hospital. His family, what they must think of us." The psychological evaluation ordered by the court painted a picture of narcissistic personality traits and an addiction to social media validation. The psychiatrist noted Marcus's complete lack of empathy for his victim and his continued focus on how the incident would affect his own life rather than Private Morrison's injuries. As the days passed and the legal process ground forward, Marcus began to understand that his 11 minutes of infamy had destroyed not just his own life, but had caused immeasurable harm to an innocent young man who had simply been doing his duty. The viral video he'd created had indeed made him famous worldwide, but as a symbol of entitled American tourism and casual cruelty, the regret that had been building since his arrest was now overwhelming. But it seemed too little, too late. Private Morrison remained in the hospital, his military career over before it had truly begun. While Marcus faced the prospect of spending the best years of his life in a British prison, forever remembered as the tourist who thought attacking a soldier would be entertaining. 3 weeks after his arrest, Marcus finally came face to face with the full consequences of his actions when Private Morrison was discharged from the hospital. The young soldier's appearance shocked even the hardened police officers present at the identification procedure. Where once had been a proud, healthy serviceman now stood a partially blind, 21-year-old whose military career had been destroyed by 11 minutes of thoughtless cruelty. Private Morrison's left eye was clouded with permanent corneal scarring, and the skin around both eyes remained red and puckered from the chemical burns. His commanding officer accompanied him, along with a victim liaison officer who had been helping him navigate the legal process. When Marcus was brought into the viewing room, Morrison's reaction was not what anyone expected. "I want to talk to him," Morrison said quietly, his voice steady despite everything he'd endured. "I need to understand why." The meeting was arranged for the following day, supervised by Detective Inspector Collins and Marcus's lawyer. Marcus had spent the night in his cell, wrestling with emotions he'd never experienced before. For the first time in his adult life, he was forced to confront the real human cost of his actions, and the weight of that realization was crushing. When Morrison walked into the interview room, Marcus couldn't meet his eyes. The young soldier moved carefully, his depth perception compromised by his vision loss, and Marcus could see the barely healed burns on his face. The proud guardsman who had stood so perfectly at his post was gone, replaced by a wounded young man whose life had been forever altered. "Why?" Morrison asked simply, taking a seat across from Marcus. "I've been trying to understand for 3 weeks. Why did you choose me? What did I ever do to you?" Marcus had prepared answers, explanations about viral videos and social media fame. But faced with Morrison's quiet dignity, all his justifications crumbled. I thought you were just acting," he whispered. "I thought the guards were just for show. I didn't think about you being a real person with a real life." "Just for show?" Morrison's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "I joined the army when I was 18 because I wanted to serve my country. I was proud to be selected for ceremonial duties at Buckingham Palace. It was the honor of my career." He paused, touching the scarred skin around his eye unconsciously. "And you destroyed it all for a video." The meeting lasted 2 hours, during which Morrison told Marcus about his life, his dreams, and what had been taken from him. He'd been planning to propose to his girlfriend after his deployment ended. He'd hoped to pursue officer training and make the army his career. He'd grown up in a small Yorkshire town where being selected for the Queen's Guard had made him a local hero. All of that was gone now. "The doctors say my vision won't improve," Morrison said. "I can't serve in combat roles. I can't even drive safely anymore. The army is giving me a medical discharge with a pension, but I'm 21 years old. What am I supposed to do with the rest of my life?" Marcus broke down completely. The tears came in waves, years of suppressed emotion and newfound understanding combining into overwhelming grief, not for himself, but for what he had done to another human being. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't think. I just wanted to be famous." "Famous?" Morrison looked at him with something approaching pity. "You are famous, Mr. Thompson. You're famous for being the man who ended a soldier's career for entertainment. Is that the legacy you wanted?" The conversation changed both men. For Morrison, it provided some closure, a chance to look his attacker in the eye and express his pain. For Marcus, it was a complete psychological breakdown of everything he thought he knew about himself and the world. The spoiled, entitled man who had thrown caustic chemicals at a stranger was forced to confront the reality of what he had done. Marcus's lawyer had been negotiating a plea deal that would have resulted in a 3-year sentence with the possibility of early release. But after his meeting with Morrison, Marcus made a decision that shocked everyone involved in the case. He instructed his lawyer to withdraw the plea negotiations and arrange for him to make a full public confession. The press conference was held at New Scotland Yard, with cameras from around the world capturing Marcus's statement. Gone was the confident, smirking social media personality. In his place stood a broken man speaking in a quiet, shaking voice. "My name is Marcus Thompson, and 3 weeks ago I committed a terrible crime," he began. "I attacked Private James Morrison, a serving member of the British Army, with a chemical weapon. I permanently damaged his eyesight and ended his military career. I did this not for any political reason, not out of any justified anger, but because I wanted to create viral content for social media." The statement continued for 20 minutes, during which Marcus took full responsibility for his actions and begged for forgiveness from Morrison, his family, the British people, and his own countrymen who had been embarrassed by his behavior. He announced that he was pleading guilty to all charges and would not appeal whatever sentence the court imposed. "I thought I was entitled to treat other people as props in my personal entertainment," Marcus said, tears streaming down his face. "I thought my right to create content was more important than Private Morrison's right to safety and dignity. I was wrong, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for what I did." The public response to Marcus's confession was mixed. Some saw it as genuine remorse and a first step toward redemption. Others viewed it as a calculated attempt to generate sympathy and reduce his sentence. But for Private Morrison, watching from his family home in Yorkshire, it represented something he hadn't expected: accountability. The sentencing hearing took place on a cold December morning, exactly 2 months after Marcus had thrown ghost pepper sauce at Private Morrison. The Old Bailey courtroom was packed with journalists, legal observers, and members of Morrison's regiment who had come to support their injured colleague. Marcus sat in the dock, barely recognizable as the confident man who had once sought viral fame. Prison had changed him physically and mentally, stripping away his arrogance and leaving behind someone who seemed genuinely broken by what he had done. Judge Patricia Whitfield had reviewed the case extensively. She had seen the medical reports detailing Morrison's permanent injuries, read the impact statements from his family and fellow soldiers, and studied the psychological evaluation of Marcus. She had also noted his complete change of attitude following his confession and his unprecedented decision to waive all appeals before sentencing. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Whitfield began, her voice carrying the weight of years of judicial experience, "you came to this country as a tourist and committed an act of shocking violence against a serving soldier. Your attack was premeditated, filmed for public consumption, and has resulted in life-changing injuries to a young man who was simply doing his duty." Marcus stood to hear his fate, his hands shaking despite his attempts to remain composed. Behind him, his parents sat with their heads bowed, finally understanding the full magnitude of their son's transformation from successful businessman to convicted felon. "However," the judge continued, "I have also noted your complete acceptance of responsibility, your genuine remorse, and your efforts to make amends. These factors, while they cannot undo the harm you have caused, demonstrate a capacity for rehabilitation that the court must consider." The sentence was 4 years imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after serving half the term. It was less than the maximum Marcus could have received, but more than his lawyer had hoped for. As the gavel fell, Marcus felt a strange sense of relief. The uncertainty was over, and he could finally begin the long process of trying to rebuild his life and make amends for his actions. Prison proved to be the education Marcus had never received despite his expensive schooling. Surrounded by men from backgrounds he had never understood, forced to live without privilege or special treatment, he began to develop the empathy that had been missing from his character. He enrolled in every program available: anger management, victim awareness, literacy tutoring for fellow inmates who couldn't read. The transformation was gradual but genuine. Marcus began writing letters to Private Morrison, not asking for forgiveness but simply expressing his ongoing remorse and updating him on his efforts to become a better person. Morrison didn't reply for months, but he read every letter, watching through the pages as his attacker struggled to understand the magnitude of what he had done. The viral video that had made Marcus infamous continued to circulate online, but its meaning had changed. Where once it had been shared as entertainment or outrage, it was now used as a teaching tool about the dangers of social media culture and the real-world consequences of treating other people as content. Universities showed it in psychology classes, military academies used it to discuss the challenges of ceremonial duties, and social media companies referenced it in their policies about harmful content. Marcus's former life as a successful software developer was completely destroyed. His company had fired him immediately after his arrest, his professional licenses were revoked, and his social media accounts were permanently banned from major platforms. But in prison, he discovered skills he never knew he had. He began teaching basic computer literacy to other inmates, helping them write letters to family members and prepare for job interviews upon release. Private Morrison's recovery was slower and more complicated. The physical healing of his burns took months, and the psychological impact lasted much longer. He struggled with anger, depression, and the loss of his military identity. Support from his regiment and family helped, but it was actually reading Marcus's letters that began his own healing process. Seeing his attacker's genuine transformation allowed Morrison to move beyond hatred toward something approaching understanding. 18 months into his sentence, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Private Morrison, now a civilian working as a counselor for other veterans dealing with trauma, had come to see him. The meeting was emotional for both men, But it marked a turning point in their relationship from victim and perpetrator to two people trying to heal from a terrible event. "I forgive you," Morrison said simply, "not because what you did was acceptable, but because carrying that anger was destroying me. Your letters showed me that you understand what you took from me, and that's enough." The conversation led to an unprecedented collaboration. Marcus and Morrison began working together on a program to educate young people about the real-world consequences of social media stunts and viral content creation. Speaking from their unique perspectives, the perpetrator and victim, of a viral assault, they could reach audiences in ways that traditional safety campaigns could not. Marcus was released after serving 2 years and 3 months of his sentence. He returned to America a changed man, facing a world that still remembered his crime but was beginning to see his redemption. He found work with a nonprofit organization that helped former inmates reintegrate into society, using his technology skills to create job placement programs and educational resources. The social media fame Marcus had once craved was replaced by a different kind of recognition. He became known as an advocate for responsible content creation and the rehabilitation of offenders. His story was featured in documentaries about social media culture and criminal justice reform. But now he was the expert warning others about the path he had taken. Private Morrison continued his work with veterans, eventually establishing a foundation to help soldiers who had been injured in non-combat situations. The foundation, partially funded by Marcus's speaking fees and book royalties, provided counseling, job training, and financial support to service members whose injuries didn't qualify for traditional combat-related benefits. The ghost pepper sauce incident at Buckingham Palace became a case study taught in law schools, business schools, and social work programs around the world. It illustrated how quickly modern life could spiral out of control, how social media could amplify poor decisions, and how genuine redemption was possible even after terrible mistakes. 5 years after that fateful November morning, Marcus and Morrison appeared together at a conference on restorative justice. Both men had been forever changed by their 11-minute encounter, but they had chosen to let that change lead them toward helping others, rather than destroying them. Marcus had learned that real influence came from lifting others up, rather than tearing them down, while Morrison had discovered that healing could come through helping others heal. The viral video that had once made Marcus internet famous still existed online, a permanent record of one man's worst moment, but it was now accompanied by thousands of hours of content showing his journey toward redemption and Morrison's remarkable capacity for forgiveness. The story that had begun with a tourist's thoughtless cruelty had become something much more powerful, a testament to the human capacity for change, growth, and the possibility of redemption even after our worst failures. Marcus Thompson never forgot the taste of regret that had filled his mouth within 11 minutes of his assault on Private Morrison. But he had learned to transform that regret into purpose, spending the rest of his life trying to prevent others from making the same devastating mistakes he had made in pursuit of fleeting fame.